It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to the third annual Global Human Rights Symposium.
The Human Rights Fellowship emerges from a broader human rights initiative at Gallatin, attempting to link human rights practice with academic work in human rights.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Haque, and I was working with the rights of people with disability with Handicap International in South Sudan. That blue marker there marks Yei town in Yei River County in central Equatoria State, which is one of the 10 states in newly independent South Sudan. It's about 150 kilometers away from the capital Juba, but it takes 6.5 hours to get there by road. So it gives you an idea of the infrastructure that's present there. But when you do get there, you find a bustling town. The 2010 census that was taken before South Sudan's independence numbered the town at approximately 19,000 people, but present numbers approximated at between 30 and 35,000 people. So understanding the location of the town is key in understanding these population movements that have come in. So if we go back, you can see that the town is very close to the border with DRC and Uganda, and so depending on the time period, this brings in both an influx of refugees from violence in the region as well as trade from other prosperous places in the region. It is also a place where people travel from within South Sudan following violence, particularly in border regions, and despite being heavily mined during the 2 civil wars that South Sudan experienced, it still has a reputation of peace and prosperity. Even though it's a bustling town, it's a 5-minute walk to an outskirt where people still rely on subsistence farming, and maize and sorghum are the staple crops. There are no commercial crops as of yet, but apparently, I've been told that even if you throw a toothpick, it will grow in this region. So to bring me to what brought me here, I share with you a quotation from Paul Farmer, which I used to frame my application for this fellowship almost a year ago. I knew that working with the rights of people with disabilities in South Sudan would mean advocating for preserving the rights of a vulnerable population within an already extremely vulnerable population. So the broader context that I was working with included the intersection of human rights with the particular development trajectory that Yei has taken, as well as questions of new nationhood and what it means to be a citizen and what rights would be afforded to a citizen of a new state. So when I make reference to human rights, these aren't human rights abuses in the fantastical sense that we sort of hear from the region in Sudan. This isn't a Darfur situation. But people with disabilities are being denied their rights because of the general lack of infrastructure, healthcare, and social welfare. So I designed my project wanting to understand how disability is embedded within sociality in Yei, and to find if and how these structures are causing inequality between people with disabilities and the rest of society. So Handicap International is the organization that I was working with, and to give you a bit of background about what they do, they're the only organization presently in South Sudan that targets beneficiaries. So like their beneficiaries are people with disabilities. They're one of the few NGOs in Yei right now, as the humanitarian programs are scaling back because after the wars are over, the humanitarian programs scale back. And now the NGOs are switching to development programs, which is something that is problematic in itself because in terms of the expectations that the population has for the delivery of services, humanitarian programs deliver material goods while development projects center around capacity building. This disconnect is something that Handicap International was dealing with while I was working with them. The main conventions that inform the way that Handicap International frame their projects are the Mine Ban Treaty, the Cluster Munitions Treaty, and most recently the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. Their definition of disability also comes from an international body, the ICF, the International Classification of Function. It's useful at this point to look at the aims of Handicap International's project in Yei and see how it's framed in the discourse of these international bodies and treaties. So over here we have 3 main goals of the project that I was working on. There were basic encouraging economic opportunities, access to health, and increased access to services, and awareness about disabilities. You can frame these into basic human rights categories that are framed within the international conventions. Already we see a focusing in on the particular categories of rights that are covered in the international conventions, But really, this is only in analysis, in the practice of this project, in the implementation. All these rights are articulated in a way that is more dynamic. They're overlapping. No one right is preferred over another, but each right is playing into each other to bolster all of them. The dynamism of these rights, of the discourse, even in a project with very specific goals, can be seen through the network that Handicap International operates in. Their projects are feeding into a broader NGO community where they're attempting to mainstream disability within other programs. They're feeding into community-based organizations as well as working with local authorities and the government. They are also currently bolstering a national disability policy to support legislation as South Sudan moves to ratify the UN CRPD. So they're working at both a national and local level. What I was working on was how all of this translated into their beneficiaries. So how this was being translated to the people it's meant to affect. I found that the main translator, the main conduit through which they delivered these messages was through their mobile team, and that's what I went out with them for most of the summer. So every day I would go out into different parts of the community and they would do their assessments, and they would basically be identifying people with disabilities with these international definitions. So they, more and more I realized that they're the ones who are the liminal beings. They're reflective of what Handicap International hoped to achieve through its programs. And they have the very difficult job of reconciling the international standards and classifications with the particular sociality that they themselves have grown up in. What do they find in these international conventions? During one of the trainings that we were doing, a colleague of mine put up her hand, and she was one of the ladies who went into the community, and she said, "Why are we spending so much time on this? This is just how you treat people normally, just under a funny name." So you can see that in these universal documents, people are already able to identify their own ideas of morality and personhood. To bring us back to the quote from Paul Farmer that remains relevant even at the end of the project, analyzing the broader analysis of power and social inequality. Through the project I did on the perceptions of disability, the findings of the study revealed that cultural logic is applied to justifying disability, and like other literature in disability studies has shown, disability isn't necessarily identified as a problem of the physical, but of the social that surrounds the body. So if you take, for example, someone with epilepsy, their family might think that they're suffering from seizures because of a wrongdoing in their family. So it becomes a space for people to come together and discuss what social problems they might be experiencing. Like one lady we were interviewing justified her daughter's epilepsy because her brother had once accidentally killed a man. So the body becomes another social space to bring these issues to light. Another example of how sociality plays in is in the implicit ranking of disability. Because of the context of South Sudan, wounded war heroes are valorized and are given legitimate social and economic capital because of their recognition from the government and their membership in military services. But someone who has the same disability and uses a tricycle because of a birth defect is severely disadvantaged because of that ranking. And as someone I worked with very closely told me, parents just don't see the value in their children if they are experiencing a disability. And so that's really what I take away from this, the conventions and the broader space that these create. These universal documents create a space for this value to be bred. And I'm sure we're all well versed in the pitfalls of the human rights discourse, but in these particular instances, this is what I come away with. The UN CRPD acknowledges personhood in a way that has not been acknowledged before. It's running parallel with local classifications of personhood and what constitutes a person and a successful person in civil society. And so it not only affords individual rights in a new state, but also gives you that space within, say, your own family to assert rights that are. Thank you.